It's Kyle here, and today I'll be talking about my favorite book villains of all time. Before I get started on my list, if you enjoyed this video, I hope you'll hit that like button and please subscribe to the channel. I really appreciate the support. So that being said, I'll get started with my list of my 5 favorite book villains of all time. In some cases, it's individual, some cases it's a family. This will make sense as the list goes on. And I'm not ranking these in any specific order, but these are overall my 5 favorite villains from books. So first off, from George R. Martin's series of A Song of Ice and Fire. I'm just holding up the first book, a Game of Thrones to represent the series, but the Lannisters. Both in the book series and the TV show are just such perfect villains. They're so absolutely evil. It's so easy to root against them in comparison to the Starks. In a lot of cases, you know, with great book villains, and villains in general, books, movies, TV shows, whatever, a lot of times, you know, for the heroes of the show to really work, or the book, you really need a great villain to play off. And the same is true. If the villain's awesome, but the good guy they're up against is just not interesting, it doesn't really work. And in this case, for this series, the Lannisters and the Starks are such a perfect rivals. They're so polar opposite each other, and they play off each other so well that it just makes for such an interesting storyline. You just love to root against the Lannisters, so that's definitely why they made my list. Next up, Dune by Frank Herbert is Baron Harkonnen, and I guess the Harkonnen family in general, but in this case it's really the Baron that really stands out. He is such an evil, scheming, always disgusting figure. Again, such polar opposite to House Atreides, which is this noble family, and it does remind me a lot of the relationship between the Lannisters and the Starks in the Game of Thrones, or A Song of Ice and Fire, whichever you want to call it. Like I said, to me the big difference is for the Harkonnens, Baron Harkonnen really does become the kind of ultimate bad guy you're just rooting against the entire time to get his comeuppance. He is a very interesting character. He's very, I wouldn't say talented, skilled, maybe is a better way to phrase it, in his political maneuvering. And, you know, so in some cases, you know, the villain is just this dumb, stupid oaf. But in this case, Baron Harkonnen is a very smart political strategist. Sorry, I can't speak today. And you're always wondering what he has planned next, and if in the end he's actually going to win or not. But such a great villain. Really does make the Dune series, I'm sorry, specifically the Dune, this first book, Dune, such an interesting storyline that you're just can't wait to see what strategy he comes up with next in a lot of cases. So that's why Baron Harkonnen from Dune by Frank Herbert makes my list. Next up is a more recent book, Red Rising by Pierce Brown. And there's several villains you could pick from Red Rising. There's a lot of great villains in this book, but the one I'm going to go with is the Jackal. For several reasons. One thing I really like about the Jackal's character in this book is, for a huge part of the book, he's completely shrouded by mystery. You don't know anything about him. He's almost like a myth. You know, for a while they're not even sure, the main characters, if the Jackal is actually a reality, or if it's just almost like a boogeyman type story that the opposing side has kind of created. And then once they realize he's real, they hear all these awful stories about him. So then they have a hard time figuring out, like, well, who is this person, and what type of person would actually do these evil acts that the Jackal is being accused of. And then towards the end of the book, when the big reveal of who the Jackal is and how he's connected with the main characters comes, it's such a shocking moment. When you actually get to meet the Jackal, it's not what you expect. You know, it's like, how can a figure like this actually be capable of such evil acts? He is such a conniving, smart character who's just willing to do anything to win. And I mean anything. And he's really such an amazing villain in the storyline. But I think the really thing that really makes him such a great character is actually the mystery built around him for so much of the storyline. It makes you constantly wonder what the big reveal is going to be. And in a lot of cases, when there's a mystery like that built up, the big reveal ends up being very disappointing. And Red Rising is not. Once it hits you, you're like, oh wow, I did not see that coming. So one big reason why Red Rising is one of my favorite sci-fi books in recent years. The characters are great, and the main villain, in my opinion, the Jackal, is a big reason why. Next up is Heir to the Empire by Timothy Zahn, a Star Wars book. If you're a fan of this channel, you know who I'm going to say, because I talk about him a lot on that channel. He's my favorite Star Wars character of all time, Grand Admiral Thrawn. And this is the book where he was introduced. Of course, there's been countless books with him being featured. I think the best way to illustrate how great of a character he is the newer books, he is now the main character. The book is built around him. He's, you know, not often the villain of the storyline is able to switch from being the villain to still be kind of villainous, but now I'm the main character. Super excited with Grand Admiral Thrawn. If you watch The Mandalorian, you know his name was teased. So there's very much assumed that either he'll be in Ahsoka's TV series or in The Mandalorian or both, or you know, it's just, I'm very excited to see him in live action. Of course, he's already appeared in the animated series Star Wars Rebels. He is such an amazing character. In a lot of ways, he's almost kind of a combination of a lot of great kind of characteristics from characters throughout history and also literature. So kind of like, think of the analytical mind of like a Sherlock, with the military genius of like a Napoleon or Alexander the Great. He's just always one step ahead. You're just so fascinated from the beginning that you find yourself beginning to root for him even when he's up against he's clearly on the bad side. He's with the Empire, but you still find yourself rooting for him because he's so interesting. You kind of like, I kind of want him to win so we can get more stories with Thrawn and stuff. He is just such an amazing character. I'm so excited to see him on a live action show. Looking forward to so much. And every time a new book comes up that Thrawn is in, I'm just so excited. And then lastly, oops, sorry, I just dropped a book. Lastly is The Pillars of the Earth by Ken Follett, and the villain in this is William. This is one of the first books I can ever remember being recommended to me because of the villain. I was actually in high school in an AP US history class, and usually the teacher in that class, which was an awesome teacher, Coach Otley, she was the girls basketball coach, but an amazing teacher. She knew so much about history, so she was an amazing teacher. I loved that class. And usually if she recommended books to us in the class, it was usually like nonfiction history books. But I particularly remember the day she came into class and she was like, I just finished the best novel last night, and it was the most I've ever rooted against a villain in my entire life. Like every page I've turned just because I wanted to see the villain get his comeuppance and something bad happened to him and him lose. And I kept on turning page after page after page just to see the villain finally get his comeuppance. Oh, that's really interesting. I've never really heard anybody before recommend a book because of the villain. But she is such an awesome teacher. Instantly went home and told Mom, like, hey, we need to go to a bookstore. I had a good book recommended to me. So the next time we got to go, at that time there wasn't a bookstore near me. We had to do a long drive down to the mall to go check it out. To, at that time, Barnes & Noble. Or was it? No, sorry, it wasn't Barnes & Noble. It was a Walden bookstore, which no longer exists. Got this book. And I am so glad Coach Otley recommended this book, because one, this is one of my favorite books of all time. If I do like a top 5 list, this is one of my 5 favorite books of all time. I don't really like picking my favorite book of all time because it almost changes with what my mood is. But this is one of those that's in that rotation of my favorite book of all time. And she was completely right. A huge reason why this story is so interesting is the villain is so hateable. Now, he's not hateable because he's a bad character, but sometimes there's a villain you're like, well, this character is so uninteresting and so bad, I hate him because of that. But then you don't want to read about him. And anytime the villain comes up, it's like, oh, this is, let's get away from the villain. This villain is so evil so despicable that you're reading, like the teacher said, the entire time just waiting to see him get his and him finally lose and finally pay for his evil acts. But at the same time, he does have a certain charisma to him, and he is an interesting character. So it's not just he's evil and you hate him. He does have a little bit of interest to him. You kind of hate to admit to yourself, like, I kind of enjoy reading about him, but I still want him to get his in the end. And in the end, a lot of times, I think that's what the villain has to be. It has to be a character you find interesting, but you still want to lose. And that's a hard time, because sometimes if you make the villain too likable or too interesting, you start rooting for him instead of the good guys. And in the end, I think that's what Ken Follett really nailed with this one. You walk the line perfectly of making the villain interesting, but so evil that you read non-stop just to see the villain get his in the end. And that's why, honestly, this villain, William, very well might be my favorite book villain of all time. He is such an amazing villain that I cannot recommend reading this book anymore. If you're really into reading a good villainous character, read The Pillars of the Earth, because he is an amazing villainous character. So that's my list. Hope you enjoyed this kind of look at the evil characters I enjoy in books. Let me know in the comments section below, who is your favorite book villain of all time? Look forward to seeing your the characters you like that are on a little bit of the bad side. Again, hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, hit that like button. If you haven't yet, please subscribe to the channel. I really appreciate the support. Hope you enjoyed the video. See you next time, and happy reading.